When my wife, Linda, passed away, my son Ethan said, "You can't bring Mom back, and Sarah's birthday is only once a year." Those words hit me like a slap in the face. They weren't harsh, at least not in a way that would make anyone want to shout in anger. But they were piercing, cold, dismissive. They felt like a betrayal. The next day, he came to me with a request as if nothing had happened. It was as if the emotional earthquake of losing Linda had left no mark on him. It was my chance to make amends for the insult he had inflicted on me and his late mother, and I knew I had to take it. I stood there, in the kitchen, staring at the spot where Linda had always stood, preparing our morning coffee, humming softly under her breath. The house felt too quiet, too still. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the phone, dialing Ethan's number. The clock on the wall said it was 8:30 a.m. The coffee pot was cold, sitting on the counter beside Linda's favorite mug, the one with a chipped rim, the one she never let me throw away. The mug still had a faint lipstick mark on the edge, a trace of her presence that seemed to make the emptiness around me even more unbearable. The kitchen, once full of life and conversation, now felt hollow. 4 rings. Then, finally, Ethan's groggy voice came through the phone. "Yeah, Dad, what's up?" I straightened my back, adjusting the black tie for the 3rd time. My reflection in the kitchen window caught my eye, the old man in the glass. I hadn't realized how much my face had aged until today. Linda's absence weighed heavily on me, but I knew what I had to do. "The funeral starts at 11:30, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, calm. In the background, loud music thumped through the phone. I could hear Sarah, his wife, shrieking about decorations. Laughter echoed in the background. It was as if nothing had changed. Ethan cleared his throat before speaking again, the casual tone in his voice only adding to the growing coldness inside me. "Dad, I told you yesterday. Sarah's birthday party is tonight. We've been planning this for months." My stomach dropped. The words hit like ice water. I gripped the receiver tighter, staring down at the faint lipstick mark on Linda's coffee mug. How could he be this callous? "Your mother's funeral is today, Ethan. Once in a lifetime." My voice wavered despite myself. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out, long and uncomfortable. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, calculating, deciding what he would say next. Then, finally, Ethan spoke, his voice almost too casual, as if he were justifying a simple request. "Look, Dad, Mom's not coming back. But Sarah's birthday only happens once a year. We've got caterers, a band, everything." I closed my eyes, trying to control the anger that bubbled up inside me. He was right, of course. Sarah's birthday only happened once a year, and Linda was gone forever. But to hear my son, my own flesh and blood, talk about her funeral with such indifference, it made me question everything. The dial tone buzzed in my ear as the line went dead. I sat there motionless, not sure if I should be angry or just deeply, deeply disappointed. I stared at the spot where Linda used to stand, remembering how she'd always hum her favorite songs in the morning while preparing breakfast. The house had never felt so empty. The sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows on the counter where Linda had always left her keys, her lipstick, her notes. It was as if the house itself had stopped breathing, waiting for something it would never get again. The kitchen clock ticked quietly, the minutes stretching longer than they ever had before. 8:47 a.m. The funeral was only hours away, and my son, my only son, wasn't even going to show up. I looked at the funeral program on the counter. Ethan's name was listed as a pallbearer. I hadn't noticed that before. I ran my fingers over the paper, feeling the smooth texture. Then, slowly, I picked up the pen and scratched his name out with deliberate strokes. I felt a strange sense of finality, like I was erasing something I could never get back. I sat there in the silence for a few more minutes, the weight of what was happening sinking deeper into my bones. I could hear the faint noise from outside, the sound of neighbors going about their usual Saturday morning routines. They had no idea what had just happened. They didn't know that my son, the boy I had raised, had chosen a birthday party over the funeral of his own mother. I couldn't even begin to explain what that felt like. I glanced over at the door. It was still open from when I had stepped inside earlier. I could feel the emptiness in the house, like an oppressive weight. The walls, which had once been alive with Linda's laughter and the sounds of family, now seemed to be closing in on me. The front door key turned with its familiar click, and I stepped inside. My steps were slow and deliberate, my feet dragging as I crossed the threshold. It felt strange, like a dream. I hung my keys on the hook Linda had put up by the door, the one she had insisted was more efficient than the little dish I used to use. It was a small thing, but now, with her gone, it felt like a symbol of everything that had been taken from me. There was no humming from the kitchen, no television playing softly in the background, no sound of Linda's footsteps moving around the house. Just the empty silence. I loosened my tie and sank into my armchair. The brown leather one Linda always insisted clashed with her floral curtains. She had wanted to redecorate for years, but I had been too busy. Too busy building the business, too busy working long hours, too busy providing for my family. And now, those curtains would stay forever, a silent reminder of all the things left undone. Our wedding photos smiled back at me from the mantel. Linda at 23, radiant in her grandmother's dress. We had married right here in Richmond, promised each other everything we had. And I had delivered on that promise, maybe too well. Memories came flooding back, unbidden. Ethan's first steps across this very living room. Chubby little hands reaching for Linda's outstretched arms. Birthday parties with homemade decorations, because we couldn't afford the store-bought ones. Linda working double shifts at the diner while I got the construction company started. She'd never complained, never once. Not when I worked 16-hour days, not when we ate macaroni and cheese for weeks on end. "We're building Ethan's future," she would whisper after he'd fallen asleep between us in our bed, too young for his own room. I would hold her, and we'd dream of better days. I found Linda's Bible on the nightstand, the bookmark still marking the psalm she loved. A handwritten note fell out, and my hand shook as I read it. "My dearest Alan, please don't let Ethan forget us. We gave him everything we had. I hope that was enough. All my love, Elle." The tears came then, unbidden, blurring my vision. It had never been enough. I had given him everything. And now, he had chosen a birthday party over his mother's funeral. I had no words when I looked at the old photo albums, the faded snapshots of Ethan growing up. His first Christmas, his first bike ride, his high school graduation, all those moments that should have bound us together, all those memories that should have meant something, now felt like fragments of a life I no longer recognized. How could I have been so blind? How had I not seen the man he was becoming, the man who would turn his back on his mother in her final moments? I slowly picked up the stack of bills Linda had organized, each one marked and neatly categorized in her meticulous handwriting. It was the small things, the details she managed so effortlessly that now seemed like insurmountable tasks. There was no one left to manage this life we had built. No one left to handle the business. No one to ensure our bills were paid. No one to remind me that, despite everything, the world keeps turning. My hand shook as I gathered the papers, looking for some kind of distraction, something to fill the space Linda had left. I didn't want to feel the anger, the deep ache that had lodged itself in my chest since the morning. I didn't want to think about the emptiness of my home or the coldness of Ethan's voice. But I had to. I had to face the reality of what had just happened and what it meant. The phone rang, and for a moment, I thought it might be Ethan. But no, It was just a call from the insurance company, asking about policy details. I hung up quickly, unable to shake the feeling that, somehow, everything was connected. The call had reminded me of what I had to do. There was a certain finality to everything now. I was alone. Ethan had made his choice, and I was left to pick up the pieces. By the time the clock hit noon, I had lost count of how many times I had reread Linda's last note. We gave him everything we had. I hoped that was enough. It wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. Not for Ethan. Not for me. I stood and walked over to the kitchen, where the dishes still sat from the night before. Linda had always insisted we clean up before bed, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. She was gone, and it felt wrong, like I was betraying her memory by doing something as mundane as washing dishes. So I left them. And now, as I stood there looking at the mess she would have never left behind, I realized something else. I had spent so many years trying to provide for Ethan, trying to make his life better, and all it had done was create a rift between us. I had built a successful business. I had given him every opportunity, but it was never enough. Ethan didn't need a father. He needed a paycheck. And I had given him that every single time. But I was done. I had been used, and I wasn't going to take it anymore. I sat back down in my armchair, running my fingers over the familiar leather. It was warm now, still soft from all those years of use. Linda had loved this chair, had always insisted we get one that was comfortable, one that would last. But I couldn't even bring myself to appreciate it anymore. All I could think about was how everything had unraveled. How the life I had worked so hard to build, the life that had included Ethan in every step, had turned out to be a lie. The phone rang again, this time the familiar number on the caller ID. It was Ethan. I had to answer. I knew it. I had no choice. If I didn't, I would regret it forever. Hello? Dad, it's me. His voice sounded tired, as if he had rehearsed what he was going to say. But I wasn't interested in his rehearsed lines, his half-hearted apologies. I wasn't interested in the way he could turn on his charm when he needed something. I had already made up my mind. Where were you, Ethan? Why weren't you at the funeral? I told you, Dad. We had the party for Sarah. It's a big deal. I know Mom wouldn't want me to miss it. Stop. Just stop. Your mother died, and you didn't even show up to say goodbye. What kind of son are you? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought he might hang up. But instead, his voice came back, quieter now. I know I screwed up, Dad. I shouldn't have missed it. I get it. But you don't understand. We've been planning this party for months. I didn't know what to do. I thought you would understand. I couldn't even begin to explain how his words made me feel. I'd spent my life doing everything for him. Every decision I made was with his future in mind. And yet, here he was, justifying his absence from his mother's funeral as though it was an acceptable thing. You didn't know what to do? I repeated. You didn't know what to do? Your mother would have given anything to have you by her side. But you couldn't be bothered. You couldn't be bothered to say goodbye. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could hear the sounds of Sarah in the background, talking excitedly about something, her voice shrill. Ethan didn't seem to care about anything else. Not his mother, not the family, not the years of sacrifices Linda and I had made for him. All of it meant nothing to him. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Ethan said finally, his voice small now. I don't know what to say. There was nothing left to say. My heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces, but I didn't care anymore. I had to stop pretending. I had to stop trying to save a relationship that had already been destroyed. I've had enough of your excuses, Ethan, I said quietly. You made your choice. And now I'm making mine. The phone went silent. Neither of us spoke for a few moments. Then I hung up. I looked around the room, taking it all in. The empty chair, the untouched dishes, the silence that seemed to have consumed everything. I had done what I needed to do, and now, for the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of peace. Ethan had made his choice, and so had I. The day after the phone call, I couldn't shake the feeling of finality. It was as if something had clicked into place, something I hadn't fully recognized until I heard Ethan's voice on the other end of the line. I sat in the same chair, the brown leather still warm from where Linda had sat before, and I thought about what I had to do. For so many years, I had been caught up in trying to do everything right by him, by my son. But now, I realized how much I had neglected the things that truly mattered, my own dignity, my own peace of mind. And it was time to reclaim both. The house felt eerily quiet without Linda's presence. The hum of the refrigerator, the rustle of the trees outside, the creaking of the old floorboards, all of it had become louder, more pronounced in the silence left behind. It was strange, almost suffocating, to live in a place that had once been filled with laughter, conversation, and the constant ebb and flow of life. Now, it felt like a mausoleum of memories, each room a tomb of the past. I stood up from my chair and walked through the living room, running my fingers along the old bookshelf that lined the far wall. Linda had spent years collecting books, filling this space with works of fiction, biographies, history, books that had shaped our lives, our conversations, and our dreams. Now, they sat untouched, their spines gathering dust. I pulled a few from the shelf, memories rushing back as I leafed through the pages. The Great Gatsby, The Catcher in the Rye, the Bible, books that had been read and reread over the years, each one a part of our story. But those days were over now. Ethan had made his choice, and it was clear that his priorities lay elsewhere. No amount of sentimental attachment to these old books or memories would change that. The future I had envisioned for us, the way we would grow old together, side by side, watching our grandchildren run through the house, had crumbled before my eyes. I let the book slip through my fingers, the sound of pages rustling breaking the silence. I wasn't sure why I'd been holding on to these things so tightly. Maybe it was because they were all I had left of the life Linda and I had built. But holding on to them, to the past, was no longer an option. I had to let go, to step forward into a new reality, one that didn't include Ethan and his broken promises. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat down at my desk, the mahogany wood smooth beneath my fingertips. The papers from the insurance company and the lawyer were scattered before me. I knew what I had to do. It was time to make the changes I had been putting off for too long. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account, scanning through the details of the past few months. It had been so easy to let the money flow to Ethan, to think that providing him with more would somehow fix the growing distance between us. But now I saw it for what it was, an endless cycle of dependence, a trap that neither of us had the courage to escape. I clicked through the various transactions, each one more painful than the last. $100,000 for his business venture that never took off. $50,000 for the house down payment. $25,000 for Sarah's wedding. The numbers blurred together, but the sum of it all, nearly $250,000, felt like a weight I had carried alone for too long. I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. It was time to take control of my life again. I had spent so many years bending over backward for Ethan, thinking that somehow, if I gave him enough, he would come back to me. But that wasn't how it worked. I could no longer enable his behavior. It was time to set boundaries, to stop being the person he turned to when things got difficult, to stop being his safety net. The first step, I knew, would be to revoke his access to the money, all of it. He had to learn how to stand on his own 2 feet. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer's number. Robertson had been with me through thick and thin, handling everything from my business contracts to our estate planning. He knew Linda well, and I trusted him implicitly. When he answered, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Robert, I need to make some changes to the will," I said, my voice steady despite the anxiety that churned in my chest. "Of course, Alan. What are we looking at?" he asked, the concern in his voice barely masked by his professional tone. "I want to remove Ethan completely. He's not getting anything. I've had enough. And I need to set up a trust for the money. It's time to stop enabling him." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Robert's chair creaking, the sound of papers rustling. "All right. Let's take this step by step. I'll draw up the new will and make sure everything is ironclad. We'll set up the trust for the remainder of your assets. It's going to be a process, but we'll get it done." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Thanks, Robert. I appreciate it." We ended the call, and I sat back in my chair, feeling both a sense of relief and the heavy weight of finality. I had just made a decision that would change everything, a decision that would sever the last thread between me and Ethan. But it was the right thing to do. I had to let him go. I had to stop pretending that he would ever change, that he would come back to me, to us, the way I had always hoped. The next few days passed slowly, each one dragging on in a haze of paperwork and quiet contemplation. The house, still filled with remnants of Linda's life, felt increasingly like a prison. I had made the decision to sever ties with Ethan, and now the quiet aftermath was settling in like a dense fog. It wasn't just the loss of Linda that I was grieving anymore. It was the loss of the family I thought I had. The first step I took in creating a new life was making the call to the bank. I had been the guarantor on Ethan and Sarah's mortgage for years, ever since they bought their house in town. They had asked for my help, of course, and I had willingly provided it, just as I had done so many times before. But now, it was time for that safety net to disappear. I had no idea how they would react, but that was no longer my problem. They would have to figure it out on their own. I sat in the same armchair Linda had always insisted I avoid, the one she said didn't match the decor, but for some reason, it was the only place where I felt a little peace. The phone call to the bank had been surprisingly simple, once I gathered the courage to make it. The bank representative, David Harrison, was courteous but unyielding when I told him I was withdrawing my guarantee on the loan. "Mr. Foster, we'll need to process the paperwork, but this will obviously affect the terms of the mortgage. You're still the primary guarantor, so we'll need to reevaluate." I nodded, though David couldn't see me. "That's fine. I'm withdrawing my guarantee effective immediately. Please proceed with whatever paperwork is necessary." The next few days felt like a turning point. I could hear the wheels of the world turning around me, and I realized how little I had truly been in control. The bank would be notifying Ethan and Sarah of the changes soon enough, and that would be the first of many consequences they would face. They would have to make their own way now. I had given them everything I could, but it was clear that my generosity had only enabled their entitlement. By Friday, things had already begun to unravel. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing the documents for the new trust when the phone rang again. This time, it was Ethan's number flashing on the screen. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should answer. The old man inside me wanted to pick up, to hear him apologize, to hear him say that he understood what he had done. But the truth was, I didn't want to hear it. I had made my decision. I wasn't interested in empty apologies anymore. I let the phone ring, and it went to voicemail. I could almost hear his voice on the other end, trying to make his case, but I didn't want to listen. This was the world he had chosen, and now he would have to live in it. The voicemail clicked off, and I knew it wouldn't be the last time. The following Monday, I received a call from my lawyer, Robert Shin. His voice was calm, but I could tell there was an edge to it, Alan, we need to discuss the trust arrangement. It seems there might be some complications with your son's situation. I wasn't surprised. Complications? I repeated, my voice tight. Yes. It appears the bank is having trouble processing your withdrawal as a guarantor. The loan they have for the house is now in jeopardy, and that could lead to foreclosure if they can't resolve it. I sat back in my chair, digesting the information. I had been hoping to avoid this. I didn't want to see Ethan suffer, but he had made his choices. He had chosen his lifestyle, his wife, his selfishness. He had made it clear that I was nothing more than a source of income to him. Let them handle it, I said, my voice firm. I'm not going to save him anymore. Robert's silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. He understood exactly what I meant. This was the turning point. There was no going back. If Ethan wanted to continue down this path, then he would have to face the consequences of his actions. I hung up the phone and stared at the pile of papers on my desk. The world around me seemed to spin a little faster now. The consequences of my decisions were beginning to unfold, and I knew that things were about to get much worse for Ethan. It didn't take long for the ripple effect to reach the rest of our family and friends. The news spread quickly. By Tuesday, I received a call from one of my old business contacts, a longtime friend named Jim. Hey, Alan, just wanted to check in and see how you were doing. I heard about the changes with Ethan, and I wanted to make sure you were all right. Jim had known me for years, and he had always been supportive. But I could hear the hint of curiosity in his voice. Everyone was talking about it. Everyone was wondering what had happened. I'm fine, Jim, I said, my voice steady but tired. I'm doing what needs to be done. Jim paused for a moment. I can't say I blame you. I've seen it before. Some kids, they just don't appreciate what's been given to them until it's too late. But you've got to take care of yourself now, Alan. Don't let this drag you down. His words echoed in my mind for hours after the call ended. He was right. I had spent so many years trying to keep my family together, trying to fix Ethan's mistakes, and in the end, it had only made things worse. I had to take care of myself now. I had to stop trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. That afternoon, I took a walk down to the local park, the same one Linda and I used to visit every Sunday afternoon. The weather was warm, and the park was alive with the sound of children playing, people jogging, and dogs barking in the distance. It felt almost like a different world. I watched as families walked hand in hand, laughing and enjoying their time together. And I realized something. My family was gone. I had given everything to it, but in the end, it wasn't enough. The realization was bittersweet. I had done the best I could. But now, it was time to let go. As I walked back home, I saw a familiar car parked in front of the house. It was Ethan's. He had come back. I didn't know whether to be angry or relieved. But I wasn't going to answer the door. Not this time. Let him face the consequences of his actions. It was no longer my responsibility. The days after Ethan's visit passed in a haze, one long blur of quiet reflection. I couldn't stop thinking about the things that had been said, the decisions I'd made, and the consequences that were now playing out in real time. Ethan had shown up at my doorstep that afternoon, but I didn't answer the door. I wasn't ready to face him again, not after everything that had happened. The idea of listening to more empty apologies, more excuses for his behavior, made me sick to my stomach. Instead, I spent my time going through the old boxes in the attic. I found the things I hadn't touched in years, mementos from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Old family albums, certificates from Ethan's school years, the first crayon drawings he'd ever made. I couldn't bring myself to throw any of it away, but neither could I look at it without feeling a deep sense of loss. I spent hours flipping through those old albums, tracing the faces of family and friends who had long since moved on. There were pictures of our wedding, Linda in her white dress, radiant and beautiful. There were pictures of Ethan as a toddler, laughing in the park, and later, as a young man, full of promise and potential. But as I looked at those pictures, I began to wonder where that boy had gone. Somewhere along the way, he had turned into someone who only cared about what he could get, not about the people who had given him everything. I couldn't deny it anymore. I had been a fool, and I had allowed Ethan to make a fool out of me. I had thought that if I just kept giving him more money, more support, more love, that one day he would come back to me, that he would recognize all that I had done for him. But it had never been about that. It had always been about him, about what he wanted, and what he expected me to give him. There was no gratitude, no appreciation, only entitlement. By the end of the week, the bank had notified me that Ethan and Sarah's mortgage was officially in default. The weight of that news hit me like a punch in the gut. Part of me had hoped that this would all resolve itself, that Ethan would find a way to make things right. But the reality was clear now. There would be no resolution, not without consequences. I didn't feel guilty about it. I couldn't. Ethan had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. It was his life, his responsibility. It was time for me to stop being the person who always picked up the pieces. He was an adult now, and he would have to face the consequences of his own actions. But even knowing all of that, even after everything I had done for him, I still felt a small pang of regret. I couldn't help but wonder if there was more I could have done. Maybe I should have been firmer with him when he was younger, when he was still forming his character. Maybe if I had been more strict, if I had pushed him harder, things would have turned out differently. But it was too late for those kinds of thoughts now. It wasn't just Ethan that I was reflecting on. As I sat alone in the quiet house, I thought about Linda. I thought about the sacrifices we had made together, the dreams we had shared, and how they had all crumbled in the wake of her passing. We had always been a team, Linda and I. She had been the heart of the family, the glue that held us together. And now she was gone, and I was left to pick up the pieces. I missed her more than I cared to admit. The house was empty without her. Her laughter, her kindness, her strength, it all seemed like a distant memory. I had spent so many years with Linda, building a life together, that now, without her, everything seemed hollow. I could still feel her presence in the house, but it wasn't enough to fill the void she had left behind. I knew I had to move forward, to start building a new life, but I couldn't help but feel lost. I had spent so much of my life devoted to my family, to my business, to providing for those I loved, that now, when all of that was gone, I didn't know what I was supposed to do with myself. I spent more time in the garden, something that Linda had always loved to do. She had tended to the flowers, the plants, and the vegetables, and I had always admired her for it. She had a green thumb, and the garden had been her sanctuary. Now, it felt like my sanctuary too. It was the one place in the house where I could find some peace, some connection to the life we had shared. But even there, as I trimmed the bushes and tended to the flowers, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing everything. Ethan had cut himself off from me, and I had made my decision to sever ties with him. Linda was gone. My business, once thriving, was now just a memory. And here I was, standing in the garden, trying to hold on to something, anything, that reminded me of the life I had lived before all of this. That afternoon, I received another call from the bank. They had begun foreclosure proceedings on Ethan and Sarah's home. It was official now. Their house would be sold at auction in a few weeks. I didn't feel a sense of satisfaction. I didn't feel like I had one. I felt empty. I had spent my life building, giving, sacrificing, and now all of it was coming to an end. The life I had worked so hard to create for my family was unraveling, piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Days turned into weeks, and I continued the slow process of making changes to my life. I focused on the trust, the foundation, the estate planning. These things were now the only constants I had left, the only things I could control. I had let go of the past, or at least I was trying to. It was harder than I expected. The old habits of worrying, caring, fixing, still clung to me, like ghosts that refused to leave. One thing I had learned during these weeks of solitude was how much I had ignored about myself in the past. I had been so wrapped up in taking care of everyone else, my business, my family, even the people who had taken me for granted, that I had completely forgotten to take care of me. I had no hobbies left, no passions that I could call my own, no future plans that didn't involve someone else's needs. And now, as I looked at the empty house and felt the quietness of my existence pressing on me, I realized just how much of me had been lost along the way. The garden had become a kind of therapy for me. But even it wasn't enough to keep the loneliness at bay. It was late one afternoon when I realized I had been walking in circles, my feet shuffling along the gravel paths, my hands clutching the shears, cutting and trimming aimlessly. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the flowers that Linda had once planted with such love. Some of them had begun to wilt. Others, like the roses, were still vibrant, but they seemed out of place now. It was in that moment, standing in the center of my garden, that the full weight of my situation hit me. Ethan was never coming back. Not in the way I had hoped. And Linda, my dear Linda, was gone for good. I had spent so many years building a future for a family that no longer existed. I had spent my entire life putting others first, and now I had nothing left. Not even the comfort of a familiar routine. I walked slowly back into the house, feeling the walls close in around me. The silence was deafening. I hadn't realized until that moment just how alone I really was. I had spent so much time focusing on the actions of others, on trying to fix things, trying to make it all work, that I had completely neglected myself. The phone rang again. It was Ethan. I had almost forgotten about him. At this point, I didn't know why he was calling. I didn't care. Part of me felt like I should pick up the phone, hear him out, but another part of me wanted to just let it ring. Let it go to voicemail. I chose the latter. I wasn't ready for another conversation that went nowhere. Another excuse. Another empty apology. I sat down at my desk, staring at the papers in front of me. The trust was almost finalized. The lawyers had been efficient. The money had been reallocated, and the charity foundation I had set up in Linda's name was starting to take shape. But none of it felt real. It all felt like I was running on autopilot, moving through the motions without any real sense of purpose. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the street. It was a quiet, sunny afternoon. Neighbors were out with their kids. The sound of laughter carried in the breeze. For a moment, I envied them. I envied their simple, carefree lives. They didn't have the burden of a son who had abandoned them. They didn't know the pain of losing someone and realizing that everything you'd worked for, everything you'd sacrificed, was for nothing. And then it hit me. Everything I had been feeling, all the anger, the regret, the emptiness, was part of a larger process. I had been grieving not just for Linda, but for the life I thought I had. The life I had built with the idea that family would always come first, that love would endure. But love wasn't enough. It never had been. I wasn't going to let this defeat me. I had already lived too long in the shadow of others' needs, bending myself to fit their expectations. It was time to take control again. Time to rebuild. Time to figure out who I was, without the weight of everyone else's problems on my shoulders. The phone rang again, and this time, I picked it up. "Alan," Ethan said, his voice barely audible. I could hear the hesitation in it. He had never spoken like this before, as if he wasn't sure where to start, or if he had the right to start at all. I took a deep breath and leaned back in my chair. "I'm listening," I said. "Look, Dad, I know I messed up. I know I haven't been there for you, for Mom. And I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say." His words didn't surprise me. The guilt was all over his voice, the regret hanging in the air between us. But it wasn't enough anymore. It was too late for apologies, for reconciliation. I had spent years trying to fix him, trying to make him see reason. "You don't need to apologize," I said quietly. "It's too late for that. You made your choices, Ethan. And I made mine." There was a pause on the other end. "Does that mean, is it really over? Us, I mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt a pang in my chest, but I knew the answer. It was the only answer I could give. "Yes, it's over. You've made your life, and I've made mine. And I'm okay with that." The line went silent for a moment, and I could almost hear Ethan's disbelief. But I was past the point of caring. It had taken me far too long to get here, but I had finally done it. I had let go. And I wasn't going to apologize for that. I hung up the phone and sat there in silence for a while, the weight of the decision settling over me. This wasn't the way I had envisioned things turning out. I had always imagined family, always imagined a future where I could grow old and share my days with Linda, with Ethan, with the people I loved. But sometimes, life doesn't work out the way you plan. I stood up and walked to the window again. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the street. I felt a shift inside me, a quiet acceptance of the changes that had come. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about moving forward, about finding peace in the life I had left. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm. It had been months since the call with Ethan, and despite the ache of the past, I felt like I had come to terms with everything. The house, once a symbol of family and togetherness, now stood as a reminder of what I had lost and what I had gained. I no longer felt trapped by the weight of regret. It had taken time, but I was learning to live again, learning to be the man I was meant to be without the constant pressure of expectation. The trust was set up. The foundation, which had begun as an idea to honor Linda's memory, was now thriving. We had already awarded a few scholarships, and there was talk of contributing to cancer research in her name. Her legacy would continue in ways that truly mattered, not through the material things that had once been so important to me, but through the lives of those we could help. Linda would have been proud. I hadn't seen Ethan since the day he showed up at my door, his apologies falling on deaf ears. I had heard through the grapevine that he and Sarah were struggling financially. Their house, now in foreclosure, was a bitter pill to swallow for them. But it was a consequence of their own actions, of their constant disregard for anything other than their immediate desires. I had given everything to them, and now they would have to pick up the pieces. On a bright Saturday morning, I sat down in the living room, looking at the family photos on the mantel. Linda's smile, captured in our wedding photo, seemed to beam back at me. The quiet, simple life we had shared was over, but it wasn't gone. I had her memory, and I had a new purpose, one that didn't revolve around trying to fix what was broken. I had learned that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is to let them go. It wasn't about closing the door permanently, but about giving them the space to grow or to fail. I had tried for so long to shield Ethan from the consequences of his actions, but the truth was, he needed to experience those consequences. It was the only way he would learn. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was just done. And that was enough. It was a month later when I got the call. I had been in the garden, trimming the roses that Linda had loved so much, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it made me pick up. "Hello? Hi, Dad. It's me, Ethan." I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should hang up, but something in his voice stopped me. There was no sarcasm, no excuses, no edge to his words. Just something different. "Hi, Ethan," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I wanted to say, I know we haven't talked much, but I've been thinking a lot about everything. And I need to tell you I'm sorry. For everything. For all the years I've been selfish. For everything I took for granted. I don't expect anything from you. I needed you to know that I see it now. I see what I did to you and Mom." His words, simple and direct, cut through me. I had heard the apology before, but there was something different this time. It wasn't just about what he wanted. It wasn't just about him trying to fix his own conscience. It was about him understanding the impact of his actions. I didn't know what to say at first. I had been waiting for this moment for so long, but now that it had come, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel. "I appreciate that, Ethan," I said slowly. "I really do. But it's not just about saying sorry. It's about showing it. And that takes time. It takes work." "I know," he replied quietly. "And I'm willing to do the work, Dad. I wanted you to know that I get it now. I understand why you did what you did. I was wrong." For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't the hope that Ethan would suddenly change into the person I had always imagined. It wasn't the hope that everything would go back to the way it was. It was the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to build something new. Not a perfect relationship, but a better one. A real one. "You have a long way to go," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But I'm willing to see where this goes. I'm willing to listen. And maybe we can start again, but it won't be the same. We both need to change. And it's going to take time. I understand. And I'm okay with that," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. We ended the call, and I sat in the garden, the sunlight warm on my face. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Ethan's words had given me something I hadn't realized I needed, closure. But more importantly, it had given me the possibility of something new. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I had spent so many years trying to protect my family, trying to fix things, that I had forgotten what it meant to live for myself. And now, I was finally beginning to understand that. The next few weeks were quiet. Ethan kept his word. He showed up on Sundays to help with the yard work, just as he had when he was younger. We didn't talk much, but the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was just there. But there was a kind of understanding between us that hadn't been there before. It was slow, but it was real. One evening, as the sun began to set and I sat in the living room, I glanced at the picture of Linda on the mantel. "I think we've done enough," I whispered, almost to myself. "I think you'd be proud of what we're starting here." And for the first time since her passing, I smiled. The end.